Imagine this. You meet a man. He is very pleasant and courteous. Conversations with him can last for hours and never get boring. And in case of anything, he is always ready to help. Here he is the perfect friend or relationship partner, you will think. However, as soon as this thought creeps into your head, this character will immediately begin to weave a web of lies around you, with the help of which will not only take your money, but also enslave your mind, literally. That's exactly what Robert Handy-Frigard was. He got acquainted with people, rubbed himself into their confidence, and as soon as the victims began to believe him, he informed them that he was an agent of the British MI5 and that the state urgently needed the help of this man. Then, skillfully manipulating the events around him, he so deeply implanted in the victims the idea of their work for the government that they without a second thought gave all their money and did everything he said. People who fell under his influence sold houses and cars, put their relatives in jail on false charges, changed their names, and all for the sake of the mythical work for the government. Frigard literally created slaves who would do whatever he said, providing him with a luxurious life on which he spent hundreds of thousands of pounds. And if you're interested in finding out how such a seemingly fantastical thing could happen in reality, then meet Robert Handy-Frigard on the other side of the law. Robert Frigard was born in 1971 in a single-parent family in the small country town of Dronfield, in the county of Derbyshire, England. Of the closest relatives, he had a mother and an older sister who very quickly fluttered out of the parental nest and flew to free bread, after which Robert became, for a lonely mother, her light in the window, and at the same time the main burden. Peers dubbed the boy Mama's boy, and in fact were in some ways right. Many years later, a forensic psychologist, describing the psychological portrait of Frigard, will note that he never met the expectations of his favorite mommy, so he strived to become not who he is in fact, by any means, and these endeavors did him no good. Classmates remembered Robert as an unsocialized and violent child, prone to violent fabrications, also a pathological liar. Success in studies, Frigard was not distinguished, but passionately dreamed of a beautiful life in which he would be popular and successful. So in 1985, at the age of 15, he dropped out of school and began his working career. After getting a job as a carpenter, Robert realized that this was not the way to success. As the authors of Crafty Crooks and Conmen wittily note, the hometown couldn't contain Frigard for long. In 1992, 20-year-old Robert begins dating a 26-year-old teacher named Allison Hopkins. Not even graduated from high school, swindler told the lady that he has a higher education and grandiose prospects, but he lacks for the realization of plans just £1,500. Borrowed, of course. It is with Allison Frigard first practiced seduction techniques, listens attentively to the girl, tells only hilarious stories, and behaves very gallantly and courteously. Well, something, but the charm he was not occupy. As one of the victims later told her, Frigard was different, but never boring. Allison later confirmed this, calling Robert a hell of a conversationalist. But being suave was only the first part of the plan. Emboldened by his success, Frigard decided to go further and stole Hopkins' bank card. After that, sweet speeches were not enough, and the teacher finally realized who she was dealing with and informed Robert that they were breaking up and she was suing him. He became furious and began a powerful collision. Stalked Allison, slept under her windows, and in other ways did not give the woman a normal life, because of which she finally decided to leave her hometown. She moved to Newport, a town 200 kilometers from Dronfield. It wasn't long before Frigard found out where she was going and chased her like a hound dog on the trail. In Newport, Frigard takes a job as a bartender at a local pub, the Swan, while simultaneously cherishing a plan for revenge against an ex. The place was frequented by wealthy students from the local agricultural college, the offspring of British farmers, who remembered Rob the bartender as a mysterious, attractive man of indeterminate age. At 21, he held himself as confidently as if he were 15 years older. Girls flirted with Rob, and young men love to discuss new models of luxury watches and sports cars. By the way, Frigard earned such a watch with the help of the teacher for whom he came here. Especially often in the bar was delayed Maria Handy, who has been meeting with a charming bartender for a month. It is Maria will introduce Robert to his first real victim, John Atkins, on which Frigard will be able to find the method, the hook on which in the next 20 years will catch unsuspecting people. The affluent and gullible 22-year-old Atkinson has already blabbed a lot of things behind the counter under the gaze of the smiling Rob, including the death of a close Irish friend. Harry had shot himself with a shotgun 3 weeks ago. The cause remained unknown. And here it is necessary to make a small remark. Why the nationality of the friend was very important for the further scam Frigard. 1992 was a turbulent year in Britain. A series of violent and unpredictable IRA terrorist attacks threw the population into a hysterical state. Every Irishman aroused suspicion among ordinary people. In addition, a year before the events described above, there was an event known as the Clonno Ambush, a fierce armed clash between IRA and British Army units, during which 4 Irish militants were killed. One of them, Kevin O'Donnell, was a student at the same agricultural college. Kevin and his comrades were shot at point-blank range, which caused a massive influx of young people into the IRA and was still being actively discussed in the media at the time of the events described. One January evening, when almost everyone had dispersed and only John was left in the bar, Frigard decided to have a bit of a joke. That morning, the IRA had committed another terrorist attack. A booby-trapped car had exploded near a store in central London. In a mysterious whisper, Frigard informed John that they needed to talk, and, taking the young man to a corner, tells the secret about Harry's death. In fact, according to the bartender, the Irishman was murdered by his fellow radicals. John, caught off guard, was stunned and even seemed to believe the bartender, and Frigard, seeing this reaction, realized that his evil joke could develop into something more. He began to tell Atkinson that his Irish friend had discovered that an IRA cell was operating at the college. What are they doing in a college, you ask? I'll tell you. Agricultural fertilizer, specifically saltpeter, because it can be used to make explosives. Harry was killed because he was trying to stop the terrorists. He wanted to prevent the bombing. To Atkinson's reasonable question about how Rob got such information, Frigard, pouting, replied, "You think I'm just a bartender? You're not that stupid, John." Indeed, Frigard was meticulous about his appearance, expensive watches, brand-name status items, the sort of thing that bartenders in off-the-beaten-path pubs near colleges don't usually wear. Atkinson suddenly just took the bait he'd thought up on the fly. Frigard took him to his room above the bar, more like a storeroom, boxes, suitcases, paintings leaning against the walls. He'd just been too lazy to sort through the junk all these months, but even that fact played into his hands. He explained to John that it was all a cover-up. In a couple weeks, the arrests will start, and he'll be out of here. But he needs John's help. The country needs John's help. MI5 are recruiting him right here, right now. So John Atkinson, the son of a well-to-do English farmer, became that night a British counterintelligence trainee. First assignment, John. Watch your Irish friends carefully. Frigard instructed. They are not what they seem. I expect a report in a week. When Atkinson came back a week later with a report on his suspicious buddies, Frigard was finally convinced that he could do whatever he wanted. Up to this point, he could have simply said it was a joke, but now, the matter was getting serious, and Frigard's intentions were becoming more and more predatory. He devised assignments for John, supposedly as part of the agent training program. Among them, create a false infomercial to bait terrorists. For example, John needs to confess to his friends that he's gay, even though he's not, dye his hair, and wear shiny, tight clothes. The country is counting on you, John. Get used to going undercover. Forcing John to take unpaid shifts at the Swan instead of studying so he could work less himself. Frigard assured him he'd be reimbursed in the future. And most importantly, to learn to take a punch like a real special agent. For this purpose, Frigard took John to the basement of the bar, where he blindfolded him and beat him up. Especially got kidneys and organs in the abdomen. The face received John less often. By the end of February, the villainous plan, which began as a cruel joke, finally formed into a plan. However, in parallel with this, reminded of himself and his past sin. Allison Hopkins, that teacher, still wrote a report on him about the theft. The case was opened, and a little later supported by charges of kidnapping. Drunken Frigard in a bar threatened to find Allison and steal, which was reported by vigilant fellow drinkers. The court ordered her to pay back the money she had spent, and the kidnapping threat case was set for trial in late March 1993. So in Frigard's head and matured a plan to kill two birds with one stone, to escape justice, and at the same time to tear Atkinson out of the familiar sphere, away from his parents and acquaintances, so that it would be easier to manipulate him. And the events are not the first time folded into the hands of Frigard. Then Sarah, Atkinson's girlfriend, broke the windshield of the car, then stole John's car. And the constant threat of attack by the IRA, prowling on the trail of agents, did not disappear, constantly fueled by inexhaustible on the con artist. In mid-March, Frigard announced to John that their cover had been blown, and they needed to leave immediately because the militants had become more active. Their girls are in danger too. And since you can't so panic, Rob came up with a plan for John that was as precise and reliable as a Swiss watch. So, John Atkinson, according to the idea of the special agent, tells the girls that he is sick with liver cancer, which is already at a terminal stage. He has about a month to live, and so he would like to spend it in the company of his best friends and his favorite girl, traveling off into the sunset in cars. So what if he's only 4 months away from college graduation? It's only one life, and he'd be out of it soon. Maria and Sarah packed their bags, counting on a month of sad tripping, and on the same day, March 18, 1993, the foursome left Newport, choosing Sheffield, a 4-hour drive away, as their first destination. After a couple of days, Frigard and Atkinson finally revealed to the girls the true purpose of the trip: to lay low to save their lives. To go illegal. IRA hit squads followed them on their heels because they knew too much, and any delay would cost them their lives. And again His Majesty Chance intervened. Near Newport on March 20, 1993, as if ordered by a conman, the IRA carried out a force action with more than 50 victims. This tragic incident finally convinced Atkinson, Sarah Smith, and Maria Handy in the rightness of the agent, and they no longer opposed him. Frigard ordered them to hand over all the money and cards, reasoning that any monetary transactions from the state have long been monitored by corrupt agents, so they would have to make it on their own. However, when these small supplies ran out, Frigard, without a shadow of embarrassment, gave the trio a command to swear from their parents, for the glory of the fatherland. Plus, he put the former students in low-paying jobs, mostly for migrants, where no registration was required, where they worked hard and brought the money they received to the agent. For every penny he promised to pay, giving receipts on behalf of the British Crown on anything that came to hand. Sheets of children's notebook, napkins, newspaper scraps. When a few years later the investigation will find Atkinson, it will turn out that he kept it all, piously believing in the return. In September 1993, the company split up. Frigard and his pregnant Mary Handy moved into a decent apartment, and John and Sarah in a shanty town on the outskirts. This was done to make it easier for Frigard to spend the proceeds of the money that flowed to him. Very much he loved luxury. Dinners in the best restaurants, elite watches, cashmere sweaters, expensive shoes, as well as luxury equipment of the German car industry. In March 1994, Maria Handy gave birth to Frigard's first daughter. Maria's parents knew where she lived, but did not want to interfere in her life, so they just sent money faithfully. Due to childbirth, Maria could not come to the bank, so Robert went to withdraw the money by proxy, and to his surprise, he was not given it because they were not officially married to Maria. That's when resourceful Frigard and takes a double surname, Handy-Frigard, so that in the future, do not get so screwed up. Then he got a job in a Volkswagen car dealership on the western outskirts of London, and this position turned out to be the job of his dreams. here and to flaunt the upgrades on the money of slaves, and to recruit new ones. And of course, he explained to the slaves that it was for cover. Such work allowed him to meet agents without the risk of being detected. By the way, there is a funny story connected with the work in the saloon. One evening, the whole team from the VW showroom went out for a drink. Separating himself from the rest of the group, Frigard tried out the crowning scenario of undercover work on one of his tipsy colleagues. The latter, to his surprise, instead of fearing for the fate of the fatherland, almost died of laughter. And the next day, the failed victim told the hilarious case to other VW employees, who together came up with a mocking nickname for Robert similar to MFI, so called the furniture store next door to their showroom. Around the same time, he separated Sarah and John into different places, for their own safety, of course. From that time on, they never saw each other again. The bar trio in its original configuration lasted 5 years. During that time, Maria Handy gave Frigard 2 daughters and worked 2 jobs to support them, herself and the agent's dad. Atkinson's parents put £390,000 into Frigard's pocket. Sarah Smith gave him her inheritance of $188 and registered everywhere as Maria Handy for the purposes of increased conspiracy and easier control of the financial flow for the agent. After all, it is much more convenient to have all the money flowing into one. Could such a fairy tale for Frigard last forever? Of course not. In 1998, John Atkinson was the first to merge. Finally exhausted from exhausting work, from living in a kennel in the suburbs and poor nutrition, he decided that it would be better to die at his parents' house from a bullet of an IRA sniper than to live like this in an illegal situation. He told this to Frigard on the phone, to which the latter was very angry and promised severe punishment from MI5, but John left anyway, and lived quietly until 2003 in Prague, until the investigators came to his door. He didn't doubt for a second that Frigard was a special agent. Maria Handy was even worse. She was from a wealthy family. The money from her indifferent parents came correctly. So what? She was already an adult and conscious, said later to journalists her father. She gave birth to Frigard 2 daughters and was his common-law wife, living in more or less tolerable conditions compared to others. By her admission, all this time Robert beat her and humiliated her. Thus, having fallen into depression, Maria began to indulge in chocolate and gained weight, which served as an additional reason for cruel abuse. "You're fat, useless, and nobody wants you," he told me, Handy recalls. Frigard took away postcards sent by her parents and regularly searched her belongings for money set aside. Maria's patience broke in late 2001. That's when she learned that Frigard had a mistress named Caroline Kauber, who will be discussed next. The unhappy woman contacted her father and asked him to take her and the girls home. When Frigard found out about this, he became enraged. "It was the worst night of my life," Maria recounts. "We were at his mother's house when he came back and said he was going to pick up the children and take them to that woman. But I knew I had to stand up to him. I stood up to him. And then he put his hands around my neck and started strangling me." Nevertheless, Maria returned to her parents alive and with her children, and just like Atkinson, she was convinced to the point of victory that Frigard was the real agent. Her parents were sure of it too. So 2 of the 3 slaves of Frigard left MI5 one way or another, but the third, Sarah Smith, disappeared until 2004, remaining a prisoner of the lies of the fake special agent, who after the loss of 2 victims, began to look for new ones. Simon Young met Robert Handy-Frigard when he was looking for a nice diamond watch in the window of Simon's watch store. Somehow, they had such a heart-to-heart conversation that the watchmaker immediately took a liking to Frigard. So much so that after a couple of joint trips to the pub agreed to hire a relative of Robert. As it would later turn out, it was Sarah Smith. In the course of their leisure time together, Frigard gradually rubbed into Simon's confidence and one day moved to his favorite topic. Here's how Simon recalled it. "On offered to do the training. Of course, I was interested in this kind of work for the government. It's every schoolboy's dream to become a secret agent. I agreed." Watchmaker Simon Young's mission, as instructed by Agent Frigard, looked like this. "You will be watched. You must do exactly as I say." The trainee was given a list of transportation by which he was to drive to a certain store on the outskirts of London, buy a can opener there at a certain time, and stash it well. To take the tube at rush hour on a certain train, opening the latest issue of GAYTIME. It's a sort of identification between agents. Whoever needs to see you will see you. Next was to go into a Manchester pub, ask for a certain man and give him this tin opener. When Young was told that such a person was not here and had never been here, he thought that was part of the assignment and without blinking an eye slipped the bartender the knife with the words, "Well, when you see him, give this to him." At this point, in the detailed oral report of the mission, Robert Handy-Frigard could not contain his laughter. Simon took offense and demanded a meeting with the special agent's bosses, but only Simon showed up for the meeting, which was scheduled in a seedy coffee shop. On the example of Young, it is especially noticeable that the intoxication of power was no less important to the swindler than money. The watchmaker had not made a new slave, but Frigard did not despair. He still had Sarah Smith, and he still had a well-established scheme of so-called recruitment, which he would soon put to use again. In the School of Intelligence fell not only unhappy students agronomists, intimidated by terrorist attacks, but also quite adequate women. In 2001, our hero, who traded face on the sale of cars in West London, met Caroline Cowper. Between them broke out a romance, which after a while began to smell of marriage. It was Caroline who was the reason for Maria Hendy's departure. For her letters Maria discovered in the belongings at Frigard's. Caroline is a successful solicitor, a clever woman, but she too was successfully brainwashed by Frigard into buying back used cars with overpayments, about £40,000 each. When she did confront her fiancé about him being a bit naked, what do you think he told her? Yes, he's an undercover MI5 agent and is currently tracking down the Polish car smuggling mafia. The cars she bought are an important part of the operational development. And he gave her back £16,000 with a promise to give her the rest later, putting her off her guard. Caroline immediately dropped all claims to such a heroic fiancé. However, for a while, a couple of weeks later, there is another unpleasant incident. From her work computer, someone paid a non-existent payment order for £14, and it was done while a special agent was at her house. Yes, of course, Special Agent Robert Frigard, who, of course, pleaded not guilty. Caroline is furious and asks Frigard for the number of his superior at MI5, threatening to call the police if he doesn't give her the phone. He, after some thought, gives her the number. And you know whose number it is. Mary Handy's daddy, who for 10 years has been so diligently providing money to the intelligence agent who is ensuring his daughter's safety. I don't know why Frigard gave Caroline his number. Maybe he was sure that he would confirm his alibi, or maybe he just mixed it up. Anyway, from the conversation with old handy Caroline Cowper deduced that Frigard was not who he said he was and decided to go to the police. He left home in the morning, went to work at the salon, returned home, called Anne Hodgins, saying hello from his daughter, and at the end of the conversation always unobtrusively reminded about the money for training at MI5. Hodgins, under the guidance of the feds, arranged with Frigard to come to England to give him the money. Only for this she must see her daughter alive and unharmed. Frigard agreed and set up a meeting in the Heathrow Airport parking lot. Anne flew to London in advance, was briefed by agents, and the parking lot was lined with cameras. No one believed Kimberly was alive anymore. And what a surprise when Frigard comes out of the house in the morning with a woman who looks just like her, even though no one had been in the house for 3 months. They drive to the airport in a brand new BMW, where Hodgins has already mingled with the crowd of arriving citizens and is walking toward the parking lot. There she spotted the brightly colored car of her son-in-law and approached it. Frigard and a woman got out of the car. Anne Hodgins, seeing her, made a tentative sign to the lurking cops, adjusting her yellow neckerchief. It's her. It's Kimberly. Frigard is instantly apprehended on suspicion of kidnapping and extortion. The freed Kimberly Adams had nothing new to say. She disappeared because Frigard suspected her of trying to escape to London, got angry, and threatened to kill her if she tried to fail the operation. To make it more convincing, he dug a grave behind the house. So by early May, Kimberly was locked in a bathroom with no right to move, just as the development of the operation to find her began. Kimberly had heard nothing about the missing Sarah Smith, but remembered that Frigard had left a briefcase with some important papers in a hotel during a romantic weekend in France. The papers found there were not just important, but invaluable to the investigation. There were payment documents from a whole group of women, still unknown to the police. The development of documents from the briefcase eventually led to Sarah Smith. The briefcase contained payment documents for a Polish woman named Renata Kister, the owner of a cleaning company. Frigard met her when a pregnant Renata came to his salon. She had recently separated from her partner, and Robert was so gallant and courteous. Like other passions, Renata bought from the groom used cars at an inflated price for themselves and their friends. But Frigard also managed to sell her money in a loan with interest to buy a car in his own. Called to the investigation, Kister for a week persistently silent. But then, after showing pictures of other mistresses, their children and withdrawal of cash from banks, talked and said that her favorite agent warned about the possibility of calling the police, but the police are not aware of the affairs of intelligence because too corrupt, so you need to keep quiet and wait for her to help. And to the last piously believed in the truthfulness of the words of Frigard. It was Renata who helped find Sarah Smith. She told how in 2002, Frigard asked to hire a refugee from Guatemala who was in the witness protection program, allegedly the wife of a crime boss who testified against him, undocumented of course, who doesn't even know the language. So Renata took her in as a cleaning lady. The investigation was very interested in the refugee and surprisingly recognized her as Sarah Smith. When meeting with the cops, Sarah continued to play the role of a refugee, pretending that yours do not understand. Then, when the investigators gave her name and data, went for a week in denial, during which she, against her will, told about the adventures of her master. The final was a meeting with Atkinson and Handy that left all three of them hysterical. Again, nothing new was revealed by Sarah. She, it turns out, had been under the influence of Robert Frigard the longest. The daughter of rich people, she lived for 10 years under the so-called cover, starving, in horrible rented rooms, working as a cleaner and dishwasher, at the very bottom of life, and for the last year and a half she pretended to be mute, while Frigard received all the pounds regularly transferred by Sarah's parents. She once lived at Heathrow Airport for 23 days, waiting for Frigard to return from vacation, eating leftovers from the garbage cans and sleeping in the waiting room because it was not allowed to leave the airport building. But even that's not Frigard's toughest prank. Sarah Smith at least brought him money, regularly and uninterruptedly. It was to his advantage to keep her under control. There were more papers in that suitcase related to one Elizabeth Bartholomew, and what Frigard had done with her is beyond me. The 22-year-old Bartholomew met Frigard in 1996, at a time when the Newport trio still existed in full force. She had gotten married 6 months earlier, which didn't stop her from having a little outing with a good-looking man in a nice car in her hubby's absence. But that's not the worst part of the episode. While she was asleep, Frigard went through the house and found some good dirt, explicit photos of Liz taken before she was married, with another young man. Frigard stole the photos and began blackmailing the shallow madam. It all started with demanding 20 for the needs of espionage. Elizabeth had only 5, so she had to take out a loan for 15 to pay off the special agent. Frigard quickly realized that he couldn't get much money from her, but he could have fun. So he started to invent orders, one funnier than the other. For all the absurdity of the assignments, the only one Elizabeth ignored was changing her name to Elizabeth Hurley. At first, Frigard made up for her snipers on the roof and important documents left at Elizabeth. She had to crawl in the dark in her own apartment to get the right bag. He repeated this joke many times in different variations. For some reason, snipers always worked without fail. Then he forbade her to use makeup and toilet paper. Then he told her to enroll in the Jehovah's Witness sect. Then to check out and join the Krishnates, wear a red sari, bleach her hair, and shave off her eyebrows. When Elizabeth's husband left her, Frigard promised that he would marry her, even though he was already engaged to Caroline Cowper at the time. But she must pass a series of more tests. Frigard brought her to a park in the middle of London and told her he would be back soon, strictly forbidding her to leave the bench. Liz sat in the park for over a week, eating nothing but a Mars bar divided into 7 parts. There were nights when I couldn't sleep because of the threat to my safety. Then I would walk in circles around the bench, she later recalled. Elizabeth had parents who were worried about their daughter and wanted to get her out of the spy life. Frigard said that the parents were also in danger if they interfered in the process of becoming an agent's wife, and therefore they had to be neutralized. Elizabeth, in order to protect her family from the ubiquitous snipers, wrote a statement against her father accusing him of sexual abuse in childhood, and when her mother tried to intervene to talk sense into her daughter, she added with the consent of the mother to the statement. Add to this the tasks with stripping naked in the middle of the street, waiting for 3 days in the rain for the next task, and so on and so forth, and you get the ruined life of a young girl. At the same time as Bartholomew, Frigard met Leslie Gardner in line at a nightclub. With her, he tried a new storyline, a government employee at the development of top-secret nuclear fuel. Their affair was short-lived because Frigard was busy with Cowper, but after a year, the agent found Leslie flaunting a short-trimmed hedgehog. He informed her that he had been enlisted for a new job in law enforcement. Though she seemed to buy his tall tales, Gardner was nevertheless not the vulnerable wimp that Frigard had hoped she would be. So recruiting had to be put on hold for later. Meetings with Leslie were infrequent but regular. One day, Frigard called her and asked to borrow some money, literally a few £1,000s, to buy himself out of the police. He was about to leave the service after several gruesome and agonizing months in Ireland, he said. He promised to pay it all back after starting a new life. According to Leslie, Frigard was genuinely touched when she agreed. In August 1999, Frigard contacted Gardner again urgently. His life, he told her, was in terrible danger. As part of the truce signed by the British government the previous summer, the IRA terrorists he would have helped put in jail were now out on the streets and coming to kill him. He asked to borrow £10,000 to ensure his own safety. Gardner sold her car to get him the money. In return, he offered a gift from his bosses in the special branch, the keys to a brand new Volkswagen, which, to her dismay, had to be returned to the showroom a few weeks later. So by 2001, there were 6 women in training at the agent school at the same time: Cowper, Kister, Hendy, Smith, Gardner, and Bartholomew. And it became impossible for even the very dodgy Frigard to deceive them all. On the spur of the moment, he managed to swindle Gardner out of a few £1,000s more, and he decided to give her up. The last time they communicated in April 2001, after which Frigard disappeared from her life. Frigard's trial lasted about 2 years. His defense line was that he had been duped and deceived. The defense attorneys pushed for bail. Frigard, who had exercised his right not to testify against himself and had been silent most of the time, suddenly freaked out during Kimberly Adams' testimony and, slamming his fist on the table, hissed, "I'm gonna find that bitch in her states and kill her," which is why he was denied bail. So he sat there for almost 2 years while the trial went on. Robert Handy-Frigard created an incredibly cynical defense, trying to turn 10 years of lies against the victims and making himself look like a victim of circumstance. In 25 years as a detective, I have never met such a skilled liar, the prosecutor said after the trial. Frigard claimed it was Atkinson who was the real con man, an HIV-positive sex maniac who lured him on that fateful first trip. The IRA ruse, he said, had been devised by this very same spoiled and lecherous farmer's son to get Frigard away from the public eye. Handy, according to Frigard, was a terrible spender, and he tried to do everything he could to save her money. Bartholomew was a skillful nymphomaniac liar who pursued him for sex. Kimberly Adams, meanwhile, slept with 4 different men, even after her engagement to Frigard. "It really messed me up," he told the court in a confidential whisper. His charms, alas, didn't work on the jury as they once did on the Volkswagen showroom staff. Only now it didn't end in friendly banter. In September 2003, Robert Handy-Frigard was found guilty of theft and kidnapping by fraud, a law unique to Britain that was applied for the first time. On September 6, he received a life sentence in prison. Elizabeth Bartholomew took little comfort from Frigard's sentence. "I mean, it's wrong," she said in a TV interview. "He's got a roof over his head. He's got food. He's got clean clothes. Yes, he's going to have a better life than I've had all these years. I won't be happy until he's dead." Caroline Cowper, on the other hand, despite the fact that it was her initiative that landed Frigard in prison, said a few months after the trial, "It's some kind of obsession, a sickness. He's still in my head. If you'd said to me, 'Caroline, I'm ordering you a cab, and I'm taking you to Wandsworth Prison, and he will see you,' I would have gone without a second thought." Isn't that awful? It's really awful. In 2009, Robert Handy-Frigard was released on parole as a non-dangerous offender on the path of correction after 5 years in prison. And what do you think happened next? 2012. Sarah Clifton, mother of a family, met a man named Rob on an app. Spark, storm, madness. And now Sandra has already locked her favorite son in her room on suspicion of his homosexuality with the help of Robert, threw her daughter out on the street, sued the Children's House and sold it, and in 2014 and disappeared altogether. In 2021, Netflix made a documentary based on these events, and Times journalists tracked down Robert Clifton, who lived with the woman he loved in a country house and bred elite beagles. Robert said there, "I sincerely admit that I made some terrible mistakes in life, for which I unconditionally and unequivocally apologize most sincerely. But all this time I was doing my best for my children, staying in the shadows for their sake, and hesitating to tell them how things really were. Which doesn't change the facts and events that everyone involved in this case chose to remain silent about. And I am very sorry that Sandra is not allowed to be with someone who loves her, and who loves her." Nothing was heard from them for a year and a half, but in the fall of 2022, Robert Frigard epically showed up in the heart of France, in the department of Creuse, near the town of Guéret. There is a commune Vidaya, whose mayor told reporters that a British couple settled there about 7 months ago. Since then, they have not seen the wife. When we wanted to talk to her, she put her phone through the fence. There was only one number on it, her husband's number. Imagine the conditions in which she lives. Imagine this round-the-clock dog howling and stench. The mayor said in an interview, 26 beagles were kept on the first floor of a dilapidated building, clearly in an unsanitary condition and in violation of animal rights. In March and June of that year, complaints were filed against the British, but the procedures had no effect. The dogs continued to howl, and so on Thursday, August 26, a sanitary inspection was organized with representatives of the gendarmerie. They were waiting for the owner at the gate. When a British-registered Audi AZ pulled up to the house, the brave gendarmes blocked the path of the insolent citizen. He got out of the car and said that he was an intelligence agent, and the gendarmes had no authority to seize dogs. The French responded by asking the Briton for his passport for further clarification of the circumstances of the case, but instead of showing the document, the man jumped back into the cabin and pressed the gas. As a result, one of the officers flew off to the side, and the second officer drove 32 meters with the car after smashing his head through the windshield. The gendarmes were taken to hospital with varying degrees of injuries, and the Briton was identified as Robert Clifton, formerly known as Robert Handy-Frigard, according to French media reports. A case has been opened for the attempted murder of an authority figure. It was also revealed that on Tuesday, August 20, Sandra Clifton had a son visiting Sandra Clifton, who almost talked the prodigal mother into returning with her dogs, which may have been the trigger for Robert Clifton. For 8 days, Frigard eluded law enforcement, but on September 2, he was apprehended by Dilbeek police in Groot-Bejaarden, near Brussels, after a European arrest warrant was issued. On September 3, he appeared before a Belgian magistrate and was detained pending his extradition to France. On September 15, the Brussels City Court authorized Handy-Frigard's extradition. On September 19, he appealed the extradition but was denied. Handy-Frigard was handed over to French authorities on October 17. He appeared before judges in Limoges on October 20, when he was charged with the alleged attempted murder of persons in possession of state power. A Limoges judge ordered that Robert be placed in pretrial detention. This criminal warrant is valid for 1 year and may be renewed, the Limoges prosecutor's office said in a statement. He is now in pretrial detention at the Limoges Detention Center, and it is likely that we will soon find out how the 30-year story of Robert Handy-Frigard's machinations will end. It was the story of Robert Handy-Frigard, a cynical manipulator and an inspired liar. A story that perfectly demonstrates how easy it really is to deceive a person.